documented on Virginia Town Hall website, and we will have information at the end of the webinar that will be provided for any additional questions or information that you might require. We are going to keep everybody muted during this call, and so any questions, clarifying questions that you might have, please enter them in the chat box, and we will get to all of the questions in the chat box by the end of this webinar. We would ask that you not make comments or comments on the document itself. Please save those for the official comments that you can begin submitting on November 9th. Next slide, please, Christine. So why are we here? We are here because of action that was taken by the General Assembly during the last session in a couple of bills that were passed through the General Assembly relating to livestock stream exclusion and nutrient management on agricultural operations of certain size. The one we're here to talk about today is the requirement that's now a part of the Code of Virginia 62.144.123 that's up on your screen, that will compel anyone who owns property in the Bay watershed on which there are 20 or more bovines pastured shall install and maintain stream exclusion practices from any perennial stream. I'm paraphrasing there, but you can read it yourself. That comes into effect not this year, but it comes into effect in the future. But we are in the process now of preparing for that. Just another important aspect of this process that we're going through right now is what is a perennial stream, because cows or bovines need to be excluded from a perennial stream. And the General Assembly also directed us to come up with a method established in guidelines, and that's the guidance document that we'll be discussing today. But it had a key element, and it's underlined in the second paragraph of the slide that you're looking at right now, and that is a process that does not require field verification. And so we were tasked with coming up with a method, and you'll be hearing all about that method in a few minutes, but it is a method that will be used where and by direction of the General Assembly, we will use that does not require somebody to go out into the field and make a field determination regarding perenniality. Next slide, please. We also have a deadline. I think the Soil and Water Board members are well aware of this. Certainly we at DCR are well aware of this, is that this all has to be done by December 31st of this year, that the methodology has to be adopted. Our board, the Soil and Water Conservation Board, and I think we've got a couple of members online right now. I haven't gone through the entire list right now. But it is required that they do that by the end of this year. And therefore, as I said, we are giving you a preview as to that guidance, and then the public comment period opens on that guidance on November 9th. And I'll say for the 400th time, please get your comments in as early as possible. Next slide, please. In the guidance document, there are a couple of definitions you should be aware of. These are used for the purposes of this act. There's a lot of difference. A number of you, I'm sure, are somewhat expert in perennial stream determinations. It's something that has been done for a number of programs over a number of years. I've had experience with it since the early 1990s as it relates to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. But in short, we have two types of streams that are defined in the draft guidance, one being perennial, which is generally the typical definition of a perennial stream is a water body that flows during years of normal precipitation, whereas intermittent streams do not meet that test. They may flow for part of the year, even in years of normal precipitation, or they may not. But what we're interested in this guidance is a perennial stream, and determining to the best that we can with a method that does not require field verification what a perennial stream is for the purposes of the act that was adopted by the General Assembly. Next slide, please. This is where I turn it over to somebody who knows something. I'm going to ask our Stu. I don't even quite know your title. I guess you haven't been around long enough for me to have that. Remember that. Allow me.
Data services manager.
Well, there you go.
There you go. Yeah.
Stu Blankenship, who is our extremely knowledgeable, experienced, and intelligent data services manager, is now going to walk you through the technical aspects of this guidance. And I'm guessing this is where the questions are going to begin to come. And so, Stu, take it away.
All right. Well, thanks, Russ. And yeah, so those of you who don't know, I'm somewhat new at DCR. I've been here for about 3 months. I'm now the data services manager, but I've been working with DCR for quite a number of years, and I've been in the GIS realm for a long time. So that's why they're turning it over to me to try to walk through this and try to explain this in layman's terms as much as possible, which is almost impossible, but I'm going to give it a shot. So the first thing we're going to start with is this slide where we describe the different data sets we're going to use for this. So I'm not going to get into a lot of detail for these data sets on this slide because subsequent slides are going to talk about how we're using them, but I will describe them briefly. The Virginia LiDAR data set, if you're not familiar with LiDAR, it's basically a technology that uses lasers. Airplanes fly over and these lasers bounce, and it gives you really accurate elevations. So really we're using the LiDAR data set for the elevation piece of it, which you're going to see is an important first step in this for determining some more accurate stream channels, essentially. From there, we move to Surgo soils, which, to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what the acronym stands for. I even tried to find it. But essentially, it's a soils data set available from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, NRCS. It includes information about soils all over the country that's been collected over a number of years. So we're going to be using that as a reference data set. The third one is an interesting data set. It's one that was developed back in 2000, well, after 2002. The first round of aerial photography was flown in 2002 for Virginia. And during that, that was one of the worst droughts statewide Virginia had seen. And interestingly enough, they actually they collected a stream data set from that based on what they could see, visible water, essentially. So that data set is kind of sat and kind of hasn't been used a whole lot. But for our purposes, it was a really good reference data set for helping with, we thought, with determining perenniality. So I'll describe how we're going to use that. And the last data set is the National Hydrography data set from USGS. It is a nationwide stream, well, not just streams, but water bodies and stream network that we're going to use as another reference data set. So next slide. So, excuse me, the first thing I wanted to talk about is, before we get to the LiDAR, is why do we need to do this first step? We're going to do a first step to create what we're calling a base data set of stream segments. So the stream network that's used primarily in Virginia is the National Hydrography data set. Now, there may be some local data sets that other folks use, but for the state, this is what we use. You can see the blue line there that represents the stream location. And then you can see the yellow line that is actually the more accurate stream location. The National Hydrography data set, it's a good data set, but spatially in places it has issues. And for purposes of what we're doing, we need more accurate stream locations. So that's why I use this illustration to show you why we're going to do this first step, which I'm going to describe in the next slide. So next slide. So this is where the LiDAR data set comes in. So we're going to, I've described what LiDAR is, and basically from that, you can derive elevation models. From those elevation models, we could use tools that are available in the geographic information system. I'm just kind of simplifying this to actually figure out where the flow is, and it will give you the stream segments essentially. And we've actually modeled this. If some of you may be aware, we had a pilot program in Rockingham that used a very similar methodology to this. So we're going to use that to get more accurate stream segments. So we get the stream features from the digital elevation models. We use some of these hydrologic tools to develop the stream segments. Then from there, we're going to divide them into smaller segments. So we're not reviewing really long segments to determine if they're perennial. So they will be broken into smaller segments. So that's really this first step, is to create this base data set. Okay, next slide. After we create that base data set, that's when we're going to be using the next data set, the other three that I described. So think about the three that I'm going to describe next as just reference data sets, essentially, that we're going to use to help determine perenniality. So the first data set, and it's not necessarily going to be in this order, but the first data set is the Surgo soils. So the Surgo soils has classifications to determine whether soils are wet or flooded, which means that if they're wet or flooded, that there's likely water there, if not most of the year, all of the year. So this is one of the indications of potential perenniality. So we're going to overlay the stream segments with these soil classifications. And then essentially, if they fall within that threshold that we've determined, we're going to flag it and say, okay, essentially the non-technical term is, I'll say, we got a hit on that. So by the way, thank you to the comment I just saw. So it's Soil Survey Geographic is what that stands for, Surgo soils. But regardless, it's a soils data set from USDA. So that's how we're going to use that first data set. And if it gets a flag, if we get a hit, we will flag it as such. Okay, next slide. So I mentioned the 2002 stream network that was developed by the Virginia Geographic Information Network. Again, it was done during a severe drought. So looking at that, the likelihood that the stream was perennial is pretty high if it was collected during that time. As I mentioned, essentially it was the way they collected it was if they could see the water on the imagery. So collected during a very severe drought. Again, same process for the soils. We're going to look at it, overlay it with our base segments. If it falls within that threshold, we will flag it as essentially we have a hit on the 2002 VGen data. Okay, next slide. Third data set is the one I mentioned, the National Hydrography data set. There actually there's data associated with the NHD that you can basically, they have perennial versus intermittent designations. We have found over the years that they're not terribly accurate, but it is another indication essentially. So we're going to use the NHD in the same way we use the other two. Overlay it with our base segments. We may have to do some buffers and things because you saw on that one slide that the stream channels that we delineate may not match up perfectly with the NHD data set. So we may have to do some buffers and things, but then we'll get a flag. From there, anyways, so we'll do that same kind of thing. If the NHD is saying that it's perennial and it matches up to one of our segments, then we will flag that segment. Okay. Next slide. So those are the three reference data sets. So we've gone through developing the base segments, then take those base segments, compare it to our three, and then from there, we will look at it, and if we have two of the three reference data sets flagged on a segment, so if a stream segment happens to have two of the three, we're going to say that we're going to classify it as perennial for purposes of this data set. So that's how we're going to be using those the base data set and the reference data sets. All right, next slide. Then from there, it's always important, you can go through and do all of that, But then you need to go back and do what we call quality assurance, quality control. So we're going to have several processes that will be undertaken after this. One simple check is to look at segments. If we have features in the base data set that are not classified as perennial, meaning they're intermittent, we will basically look upstream from there and make sure that nothing is classified as perennial. If you have an upstream segment, if you have an intermittent segment, everything upstream from that should be intermittent. There shouldn't be perennial streams upstream. So that's one thing we're going to check. Sample segments are going to be chosen as well for detailed review. We're going to zoom in. Okay, again, a lot of this is going to be automated. So we need to go in, look at segments more closely, and then actually using the aerial photography, just do some additional checking, looking for some of the characteristics that are described there, bed and bank present. Sometimes, is that indicative of perennial flow? Sinuosity, meaning, if a stream is in a very flat area and it's perennial, you're going to tend to see a lot of meandering with that stream. So that's a characteristic you can look for. Riffles and pools. If you see these ripples and pools, sometimes that can be an indication of perenniality. So there's other steps, but those are some of the steps we're going to take. If in that quality control process we find issues with some of these things that maybe are systematic or something, we can go back and tweak our processes and run through things again. So that is the purpose of the quality control. So there will be a significant quality control process. Okay, next slide. So access to the final data set. After we finish this, we will make the data set available through the department's website. There's a variety of ways we can do this. We've talked about this, but the data will be publicly available for review. So once we do have the final data set created, it will be available to the public for review through a variety of means, electronically. We will talk about what those are, but we will make sure that the data is available in the format that makes sense for everybody to review it. Okay, next slide. And I think that's where I hand it back to Russ. Yes, and I see some questions coming in, and I don't know, you'll have to, if we deal with it, we talk about those later. But anyway, back to you, Russ.
Thanks, Stu. Yes, we'll tick through the questions that are appearing in the chat box. Just one other addition is that the guidance does take into account. Many of you know that the areas within the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act determinations of perenniality have been made, whether or not they appear on a local map or whether they have been done on a site-by-site basis. And we would intend to capture those as well. The only obviously proviso is that we would need to see some proof of that determination instead of somebody just saying, oh yeah, somebody came out 10 years ago and said it wasn't perennial. It would have to appear on a local map, or there would have to be some other documentation to show that a perennial determination has been made for that particular stream segment. So we don't want to do necessarily extra work when there has been already a perenniality determination made for a particular stream segment on a particular property. So that's all that, that again is an issue that is addressed in the guidance document as well. Next slide, and I think Christine, you're gonna jump in on this, and then we'll get to the question.
All right, I just wanted everybody to know what the next steps were. So as Russ has said at least 250 times, the public comment period opens on Monday. It closes Wednesday, December 9th. Our Soil and Water Conservation Board meeting is on Wednesday, December 16th, which is one of the reasons we are asking, or is the reason we are asking everybody to comment as early as possible. So there it is in big letters again, to please comment early. There are two options, really, the easiest way for us to get your comments. One is to comment directly on the Virginia Regulatory Town Hall. There are steps on how you do that. I'll go through them. On the left-hand column, when you get to the Virginia Town Hall, there is a click on the comment forums, which then opens another tab and it starts, I think the first one's regulatory activity comment forums and the other one is the guidance document forums. You want to click on the guidance document forums and then look under the Department of Conservation and Recreation. It will take you to the guidance document and also let you either upload comments or enter them in. The other thing you can do is actually just send them directly to me. It's Christine.Watlington at dcr.virginia.gov. The other thing you can do is if you have questions that come up after this webinar or something wasn't clarified well enough, you're more than welcome to send me the questions and I will find out the answers and send them back to you. But that is just the reason we're doing the webinars, to make sure everybody sort of has a understanding of the methodology, the reasons why we're doing it the way we're doing it, and requesting comments early so we can more effectively address your concerns before our board meeting on December 16th. Russ, do you want me to, and Stu, do you want me to read the questions we have, or do you just want to continue addressing them in the chat?
And tick through the questions, and then we'll respond to those that are in the chat box right now. And again, as Christine said, if there are things that occur to you after you've looked at the guidance and have additional questions before you submit your comments, certainly contact Christine and we'll get you answers. You know, these are fairly technical issues that we're dealing with, but we'll get you what answers that you might need in order for you to make the most informed comments that you can. But Christine, why don't you go ahead and MC the answers to the question, because I suspect they're all going to be answered by Stu.
Sort of.
Or attempted to answer. I may not be able to answer all of these today.
Right. I got it. This one you might. What is the resolution of the LiDAR data set?
And actually, that's one that I can't give a direct answer to today. Okay. The LiDAR data set for Virginia, and I could point, I think what I can do here is point folks, and maybe we can do this in more of the formal comments, to the reference, the reference where we're getting the LiDAR data set from. It is a collection of LiDAR from across the state. It was not all done at the same time. So from my understanding, the resolution is not necessarily consistent across the state. So that is something I can pull together, maybe give what like the minimum and what the maximum resolution is. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember what those min and maxes are. But that's something that I can pull together and provide, and actually then point folks to the source for the LiDAR data. So that's really the best answer I can give on that one right now.
Okay, the next one, I don't know that you'll, it's going to be the same.
I know this one. No, I know this one.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
then go for it.
Was the 2002 VGen stream observation imagery leaf off or no? It was leaf off, yes. So any of this VGen, what they call the Virginia Base Mapping Program imagery, is always leaf off. So they fly it during the season that's leaf off. Now, one of the things about that is, so that means springtime, essentially February to early April-ish, somewhere in there is when this imagery was collected. So it was leaf off, yes.
Okay.
All right.
I think the next one we may have addressed, maybe not as directly. What consideration has been given to be consistent with BAC locality perennial flow determinations and/or maps? Russ, did you want to clarify any on that?
I think so. I guess I asked Adrian if the slide where you might have asked that question prior to that slide where we discussed it, if you needed any additional clarification of that, we'd be happy.
Well, I guess
that question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guidance talks about, I guess, if a previous determination had been made, and in some instances, there would have been a field determination for a locality map, but not in all instances. So I guess I'm questioning in my head, you know, whether that should be a point in the process of going and checking the locality map.
I know we have a couple of folks from DEQ on the line if they'd want to talk a little bit about that. I do understand the question because I know there are locality maps that are part of the Bay Act ordinance, but then field determinations are still done even with the existence of those maps. But I don't know, I thought I saw Yuta Schneider was on and perhaps others from DEQ who just could illuminate us a little bit more on that or comment on Adrian's question. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I give you the opportunity.
Yeah, hi Russ, this is Yuta. Thanks for the opportunity. I think that it's a good question, and you know, certainly something that that we should consider. And certainly, you know, if there's any comments related to that on the guidance, you know, we can circle back and look into that a little bit more. I think it's as you said, Russ, with regarding the base maps and then, you know, specific field determinations based on projects.
Yeah, I mean, our thought was if that determination had been made, that would be sufficient for these purposes. But of course, you know, each of these through the Bay Act, each locality has a slightly different ordinance and perhaps a slightly different way of approaching how they determine perenniality. And so that if some additional information would certainly be helpful. And I think we can consult again with DEQ on that question before we come to a final conclusion. But Adrian, just getting back to your question, certainly that's something that we thought long and hard about and had a number of discussions with DEQ to date. And we can continue that to just make sure that we get it right.
Thanks,
hey, Russ.
Make sure there are no conflicts out there.
Understood. Thanks.
The next is more of a statement. It's, I believe, about the quality control that you were talking about, Stu. It says, assume the reverse is also true. All segments downstream of a perennial segment will be perennial.
Yeah, and can you hear me? Because I got disconnected.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I got disconnected. Sorry about that. My phone just hung up on me. So yes. I was just describing, I didn't describe the entire QA/QC process. So yes, for the logic of what you're describing, exactly, yeah. So we were saying if it was intermittent, we'd look upstream, perennial, same thing, yes, yeah.
Are we going to ground truth the data sets in the field for quality control purposes?
So that was not something that, honestly, that we put in as part of our process. That was not something we have listed in the methodology. I mean, that's something we would need to discuss. So that was not part of what we were proposing. And I know there's another comment related to this as well. So I think, to me, I would take that as a comment where we'll have to look at that comment and discuss internally as far as is that something we want to add to our process. But it was not part of the original methodology that we've listed now.
Okay, I think this is similar in some ways to Adrian's, that potentially we need to talk to DEQ about some more. Although the guidance addresses prior determinations by locality, what about future determinations that are based on field observations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would think it would be, they would, even though they are happening in the future, they will have happened at some point. And so we would, just as our intention is to ensure that determinations made under the Bay Act or other regulatory programs are captured, I would think that we would, allow for that. But I don't know you, Jeremiah, but I would encourage you to submit that comment beginning on November 9th. So make sure that we look at that carefully and come up with a logical approach to addressing that.
Stu, I think this one is you. It's more of a statement again. Without a field verification from,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, yeah, I'll read it. Without the field verification of the desktop, how will small headwater streams be accounted for? Spring-driven systems rarely can be observed from aerial photography, may have a small LiDAR footprint. That's related to actually the other comment that was about field verification. So I think based on that comment, we'll come back and we'll have some internal discussions about if there's some things that we might be able to do to account for those types of things. And again, talk about that as part of the field verification comment. So I don't have any specific feedback on that one right now. And I think the next one, if I can go ahead, what about karst topography and its effect on the perenniality of segments on streams? Another one that we hadn't necessarily taken into account for our methodology. So I think, like Russ said, I would encourage you to put that in as one of the official comments. We can have some internal discussions to talk about if there's some things we can do to take that into account as well.
If necessary, what is the process for challenging or disputing a perenniality finding from DCR?
You want to take that one, Christine?
Sure. Any of the perenniality determinations would actually be an agency case decision, which means the person impacted by that case decision would be subject to all the procedures and relief provided by the Administrative Process Act. So informal fact findings, hearings, and appeals to the courts, truthfully.
Yeah, I would just add in the actual statute that established this requirement for DCR to develop this process for use without field determination. There is nothing that speaks to that, but as Christine notes, there are protections for individuals based on case decisions that agencies make within the Administrative Process Act. But it does not appear any process for doing that in the Act that compels us to develop this methodology.
The legislation defines perennial as being depicted on the most recent USGS topo quad map. Did an initial review highlight major discrepancies on the USGS map? And does this process actually track and comport with the legislation?
So I'm not sure who's the best to answer that, because part of it talks about the legislation.
Right. How about you handle the first part?
Well, basically, when you say does an initial review highlight major discrepancies on the USGS maps, I mean, that's something we could certainly, I mean, we haven't done an initial review yet, right? Something we could look at doing, potentially, is comparing what we come up with through this process to what is depicted on the USGS maps. That's something we could do to see if there are any major discrepancies. So it's possible, but it's something we would need to talk about. So, I mean, certainly that's something to do. If I remember correctly, I felt like the way it was read, the way the legislation read is it was on the USGS maps or a process, something like that. I think the way it was worded is important for that question. So, as far as the second part of the question.
So we have, I would say, the process we've currently, the guidance document and the process we are currently discussing does comport with the legislation. It's the way I've got the definition back up on the screen. It's either perennial on the USGS map or identified by a method that does not require field verification. So it's pretty open-ended about what that method should be, as long as it does not require field verification. So I believe we are within the intent of the legislation with the method that we are proposing. Russ, is there anything you wanted to add?
Just to clarify the question, the presumption then in the reading of the legislation is that we could simply use the USGS quads.
Right.
I think, in the internal discussions we've had is that, many of those are very old and may not be as accurate as they ought to be. And that we frankly think that the method that we've done is perhaps would be a bit more accurate than an old USGS topo quad map. So that gives us, this doesn't come into play in the sense of there is no statutory or regulatory requirement for livestock exclusion from these perennial streams for several more years. But still, this is, we do have that option. I think it's generally in Stu, please correct me if I'm wrong. There's some issues obviously with USGS quad maps depending on their age and their accuracy.
Yeah, some of those maps, excuse me, some of those maps are very, very old. Yes. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's something we'll talk about internally, the idea of the discrepancies and things, but just simply taking those topo maps and using those as the source, I think could cause more issues simply because of their age as much as anything else.
Our interest obviously is to ensure that, that it's as accurate as we can within the framework of the regulation or of the statute. And that, it's, we don't want to be in the business of requiring fences where there is not a perennial stream. And we don't want, again, these would be, we don't want to spend public money on those, and we certainly don't want to make requirements of landowners or agricultural operators where it is not something that is required by the legislation. And so, we're walking a little bit of a fine line, but through the process that Stu has worked on and developed, we have some comfort in it's not going to be perfect, but it may be somewhat more accurate than just relying on the quad maps.
We have, the next one is, will this data be loaded into the tracking program for better mapping? We have had conversations about where and how this data will be available. I believe, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the AgBMP tracking module is one of the places we were going to load the data set to, in addition to having it. Go ahead.
Correct. Yes. I mean, so our intention would be to make it available publicly, but for those who are users of the AgBMP tracking application, yes, our intention would be to add this as an additional layer. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm not sure we can actually.
Christine, you see the question just above that one from.
Yes, but he answered it in his second one.
Oh, I got you. I'm sorry.
But Russ, maybe you want to answer. Takes out the requirement for site specific. What was the driver for this provision? And that's the does not require field verification. Cost or ease.
I don't have a clear answer to that question. That my presumption is that it was to field verification can be expensive, and if it were a requirement for the landowner to verify whether or not a water body on their property was perennial, that costs money. That is done as part of the development process under the Bay Act. When a perenniality determination is made, it needs to be, in many cases, field verified, and you got to hire a consultant and an expert. And so I think that the underlying purpose was to make this process as inexpensive as possible, as hopefully as accurate as possible, but also recognizing that any field determination brings additional cost, whether it be to the public or to the private landowner.
And then the last one since this is for stream fencing, is it possible to just focus on existing pasture or ag land?
Good question. Good question. That's a great question. I think it's something we can, with that comment, we can look at it. I think the point I guess you're getting at there is areas where there may not be pasture. Is it as important, right? Or whatever you might want to say. Where it's really important is where there is pasture. Let's have some internal discussions about that and see if there's something we might, maybe that's where we focus the QA/QC. Not sure, but we can come up with some potential ideas for that.
And that's the last comment. Oh, Martha, what would be the definition of pasture? I guess that goes back to your earlier question. At the moment, the law leaves it fairly broad. It's just property where they are. So, but.
Yeah, because I mean, if you look at the statute, Martha, you know, it's property. It doesn't specifically say pastured. They say where are pastured, whether or not they're on, quote, pasture through a technical definition is not addressed in the statute. So again, that would be something we would like to get a comment beginning on November 9th on that question and look at that.
There was another comment about the RPA maps and making sure that county efforts are not overruled by this data set. I think that potentially these issues related to the Bay Act provisions and RPAs and those buffers, we just probably have more conversations with DEQ and make sure that our intent to not have these determinations under this guidance document overrule the counties is potentially just clarified and more clear in the way we stated it for this guidance document.
And I suspect in the Fairfax County example, might be difficult to find herds of 20 bovines anywhere in Fairfax County, although there may be a few.
That's the last question or comment in the chat box. Except that maybe we look at the ag census data for pasture when we were talking about if there's a way to limit this to existing ag or pasture. So Russ, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to stay on for a couple more minutes.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and just put that last slide back up just to make sure everybody sees how the comment period is going to work. Again, for the 407th time, we really would very much appreciate comments as early as you can, beginning on November 9th or as close to November 9th as you could, just for our own workload and our capacity to present accurately the information to the board and to address. Already there's been just some excellent questions that you all have given us today, things to think about. And so we want to have the full opportunity to consider those questions before making our final recommendation to the board when they meet on December 16th. So just please be nice to us bureaucrats if you can. We would very much appreciate it. And I'm not going to read the private message that Chuck Arneson from our Soil and Water Board just sent me about Fairfax County, but in any case, in any case, I just would say thank you again. If you need additional clarification or questions, please route those through Christine, Stu, and his staff. We'll be happy to delve into the technical aspects of any of the data sets or questions that you might have on a technical nature. Obviously, we are bound by the words of the statute, and so you know, if there are things that people are requesting us to do that we are not empowered to do in the statute, we're certainly not going to be able to do those. But we will, you know, our intention is to fulfill the requirements as the General Assembly gave them to us. So unless there are any further questions, I won't say comments because we're not taking those until November 9th, but unless there are any further questions, I would just thank everybody for taking the time this morning. Again, we're available to answer questions before you submit your comments at any time, and we appreciate your interest in this and your assistance as we try to get this right. Christine, did you want to follow up with any final comments, or Stu? Otherwise, we will close the webinar.
This is Stu. I'll just say thanks for the comments. Really great questions and comments. It already given me some things to think about. So, and thanks for your time and thoughtfulness on what we presented. Yeah.
Christine,
thank you. So.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, there's just one more question just came in. Stu, how will you be sharing the LiDAR data set?
I had put a comment.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I had put a comment in the chat. If you had a question that we couldn't answer, to please email me, and I will respond back to you. With Stu had said he needed. He was going to send a link or something about the LiDAR data set and maybe some background information. If somebody will send me their email, I will get the information from Stu and send it back out.
Okay. And also, this webinar has been recorded. Is that correct, Christine?
It is.
And would we then make it available if anybody requests it?
Yes, I'm going to put it out on the website. I will also put the presentation out on the website.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for taking the time this morning, and thank particularly to Christine and Stu for putting this together. And again, we welcome your comments beginning on November 9th and as early as possible. So thank you very much. Have a good morning.
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you. Bye.